Equal means equal. I'm Susanna Woodhead, and this is Bookmarks. Hello and welcome to Bookmarks. I'm your host, Susanna Woodhead. The Equal Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution failed to be ratified, but several organizations continue to work on its passage. A new documentary, Equal Means Equal, produced by Kamala Lopez of Heroica Films, lays out many ways in which women are mistreated here and abroad, and it represents the ERA as a possible remedy to these problems. Here's a portion of the film's trailer.
Time ran out for the Equal Rights Amendment today. The 24-word statement pledging equality for women fell 3 states short of ratification.
I was around when the ERA wasn't ratified.
Women and men still do not have equal rights.
There's no guarantee against discrimination.
If you can pay a woman less than a man, then that's a huge savings to a company.
We're not talking about a glass ceiling here, we're talking about a brick wall.
The gender pay gap among management is about $14,500.
You might win a lawsuit, but you never work again.
Mothers are much less likely to be recommended for management positions.
The laws that I thought were going to protect me didn't.
Women are the means of reproduction. If we didn't have wombs, we would be fine.
We thought that the birth control issue was settled. It is far from settled.
Because our reproductive destiny is our economic destiny. It will affect our health outcomes and our economic outcomes for us and our children for the rest of our lives.
Ms. Lopez joins us today. She is an award-winning film and television actress, producer, director, and writer. She has appeared in over 30 feature films and over 70 television shows. In 1995, she formed the production company Heroica Films to make media by, for, and about women. In 2009, she founded the ERA Education Project to raise awareness about the need to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. The state of California awarded her the 2016 Latino Spirit Award because of her social justice work on behalf of women and girls, and she was just named Champion of Justice by Equal Rights Advocates, a national civil rights organization. And joining us to critique the film is Cathy Reisenwitz. She is editor-in-chief of Sex and the State, and her writing has appeared in The Week, Forbes, The Chicago Tribune, The Daily Beast, Vice, Motherboard, Reason Magazine, Talking Points Memo, and other publications. She serves on the board of advisors for the Center for the Stateless Society. She has spoken on topics of economic freedom, Bitcoin, and feminism at numerous venues. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So, Kamala Lopez, could you give us, in a nutshell, the main thesis of your film?
Well, the main thesis of my film is that women, like all human beings, deserve equal rights under the law, and presently in the United States, under our federal law, women do not enjoy the same rights as men. Our Constitution was written at a time where women were chattel. In fact, the legal model for wives was the legal model for slaves, and we failed to change anything in the Constitution to protect and include women except for the vote, which we received in 1920. In 1923, Alice Paul wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, assuming that that was the necessary next step on the path for women to become fully included in this country. Unfortunately, after many, many years of struggle, that fight ended in 1982. And for myself and women of the generations that came after me, this was a complete void of knowledge. So we are now dealing with a society in which 90% of us do not know that men and women do not enjoy the same rights under our federal Constitution, and that to me is an epic violation of all of our civil rights, because it affects not only women, but children and families. And I think it's a national disgrace. And I think given the fact that Most other countries in the world have a sex equality provision in their constitution, and in fact that we dictate that others have it, as we did with Afghanistan, Japan, and several others. The fact that we don't is an incredible hypocrisy.
And Cathy, what is your critique of the film?
Well, I first want to say I thought it was a really great film. I really enjoyed watching it. I've been writing about feminism for years and learned a lot from the film, so I thought it was fantastic. My main criticism, though, is that while you do a great job bringing up some very pressing issues facing women in the United States and abroad, my issue is that you cannot legislate equality, and that in attempting to do so, especially with something as blunt as a constitutional amendment, I fear that we're going to create more problems than the ERA is going to solve.
What would you say to that?
Well, I think that that is one of the fears that a lot of people have had, and very, very intelligent people, scholars in fact, have had those same concerns. It's pretty much divided 50-50 of scholars that believe what you've just said and scholars that don't. But my point is, it's a matter of principle. And I do believe that in our foundational document, the inclusion of women is not an optional matter. What the fallout will be is what it will be, and we will need to address it. And it's true, we will have to go back into all of our laws and examine them carefully for sexism. And I think that it's time for that. And I think, Cathy, that you would agree that this country has gotten to a point where a lot of our systems are no longer working in this day and age. They were working before maybe, but the society has changed vastly over 200 years. And I think we really need to look at our Constitution and agree with the Founding Fathers that it's a living and breathing document that needs to be brought up to the times.
I think in 1923, when the ERA first was written, it was more necessary than it is today. I do think, however, that the most compelling piece of evidence for me for why the ERA is not going to solve the problems that you address in your film is that if you look at the way sexism tends to manifest today versus how it manifested in 1923, it's very, very different. Society is very different. Certainly than when the Constitution was created, certainly since 1923. The way that sexism tends to manifest today is not overt, and it's not clear-cut. For example, you bring up the issue of the wage gap. The wage gap still exists. It's almost unchanged since the 70s when the ERA failed. What has changed, though, is that the reason for the wage gap, if you correct for hours worked, qualifications, and flexibility of schedule, and years worked, it goes to about 3%. So what that means is that the wage gap results from women's choices. Now, we can have a discussion, and I believe we should have a discussion about why women are working fewer hours, demanding more flexible schedules, choosing fields that are lower paid. But you can't legislate that. The ERA isn't going to do anything about that. So when you look at, okay, why are women overrepresented in poverty? Well, a lot of that, again, has to do with women's choices to become mothers as opposed to pursue careers. The ERA can't fix that. You can't legislate women's choices to have a baby instead of going to college. So what the ERA will do is it will bring forth a huge amount, most likely, of lawsuits. And the problem with suing about gender discrimination at this point in time is that there aren't clear-cut, for the most part, policies of gender discrimination. They're very, very rare. And even where they do exist, because they're not written policies, it requires mind reading to figure out whether you chose to pay someone less because they're a woman. Another issue is that women are not being discriminated against. Mothers are being discriminated against. There's much more evidence that mothers are discriminated against in the workforce.
And your response would be?
So I do disagree with that. I do think that once the Equal Rights Amendment is ratified, we are going to see some very profound and immediate changes right now, the way we've set up this society, it seems like we are given, I mean, that's the lot that we're given, but there are not very many attempts made to, as there are in Europe, for instance, to say, well, parenting is a joint responsibility and a joint joy, so we're going to give maternity leave and paternity leave. We have a situation now in this country where 70% of school children have working mothers, but we've done nothing to address universal child care. So I feel like, in a way, we're told, yes, you can work, and in some cases, yes, you must work, but the fact that we have children and that for the first year or perhaps 2 or 3 years, we need to be with those children, or somebody needs to be with those children, is not really even dealt with in our society at all. For instance, saying the first year of birth, we're going to provide nursery cares for mothers that want to get back to work. For instance, mothers that go back to work after 3 or 4 years, they find that their pay has dropped horribly, or they can't get back in. But they can't really leave their babies when they're tiny babies. It's impossible to do. In New York City, infant care will cost you over $1,700 a month. So most women can't even afford to do that. And about the lawsuits, one thing I do want to say is, oftentimes the people that most need the courts find that they cannot use them. And I don't think that the using the fact that the courts are clogged is appropriate. I think what's correct is to say everybody deserves their day in court. This is the country that we live in, that you have a right to, if you've been harmed, to take that to a jury or take that to a court. And less are we able to do such things. And in family court, forget it. Forget it. You could wait years. I mean, I know people who have horrible cases where their children were literally stolen from them, and they have not been able to do anything or get anywhere. So I do think we've got to get our courts working more for women, not less. And so if there are to be lawsuits, first of all, we should look at the Supreme Court, because they keep telling us if we don't have civil and human rights for women written into our Constitution, and you bring me a case like the Christy Brancalo rape case, when you get to it, I can't do anything about that. I can't legislate on something that's not in our Constitution. So for that reason, and that reason alone, I would say it's imperative that we put that in the Constitution so that women can be understood in the same way that corporations are persons, that females too are persons and deserves the rights of persons.
There's a lot to address there, but I'm going to start with the issue of biological realities, that women have to be responsible for creating new people. That's an issue. I think it's an important issue. I think it's an issue that we need to deal with as a society. My problem with using the ERA to try to deal with that kind of thing is that if you look at Sweden and other European countries that have so-called family-friendly policies in place, they guarantee parental leave to either parent who wants to take it. Sometimes they have financial incentives for having children. They have heavily subsidized or free daycare starting at a young age. What's really, really interesting about the outcomes of those policies is that there's actually a positive relationship between family-friendly policies and unequal participation in the workforce. So women actually work less and earn less in those countries than they do in the United States. And I'm not here to say whether we believe that bearing children is so important that it's worth downgrading women as far as what they earn and how much they're promoted. But I would say that I don't want the courts or the government to decide that, to have that impact. I would rather instead promote social norms that it should not be women necessarily who take advantage of those programs, that take the leave after they have their children, especially because, again, very different from 1923. today, single childless women in cities out-earn their male counterparts. We're moving toward an economy that rewards education and interpersonal skills and high-skill labor. Women are perfectly suited for the jobs of the future. And I think that while I agree with the courts, with your issue with the lawsuits, I agree that everyone should have their day in court, but the clogging does matter. Filling up the courts with baseless lawsuits because lawyers see a way to make a buck actually deprives everyone of justice. So I'm very worried about a backlash, even just from agitating for the ERA. Not that that's, and I'm with you that the idea that it's a principle, right? I think that it's, when I saw Scalia mention that the fact that women are not protected informs his judicial opinions, it enraged me. But again, I believe that one of the best things that we can do to get justice for women in the courts, which you brought up, disparate sentencing. I did not know that was such an issue. That a man is much more likely to get a lenient sentence for self-defense than a woman, even though a woman is very, very likely to die at the hands of her domestic partner. If she tries to defend herself against him, she is likely to get put under the jail. We need to elect the right representatives, and we need to get the right judges in place. Like, that to me is the right now, not pie in the sky, actionable thing that we've got to do, one. So that's the legal aspect of it. But second, I think that we need to have a conversation about men's and women's roles in society.
I agree with you 1,000,000% that our culture is the issue. I'm trying to think, though, of how to approach it from multiple directions. And what I find, it's kind of like when you build a skyscraper, and we've got women building incredible apartments in this skyscraper. And I'm just scared because we don't have the foundation. We didn't get that cement poured. And so we do these things like the Pregnancy Discrimination Act or Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay or this or these state things. We have ERA in 22 states, but each state has a different version. And we see in the courts that a state with ERA where the litigant alleges sex discrimination, they have something like 80% chance of winning, whereas if there is no ERA, that's kind of maybe they'll win, maybe they won't. It's a very big difference. So I do see what you're saying. I am scared of the backlash. I do agree with you that there may be some unintended consequences, but I feel strongly, as a matter of principle and integrity, as a matter of being the country that professes to give life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness to all of its people, we're going to have to suck it up and get through that tough period. And it may be 30 years long. It may take 50. The civil rights laws had unintended consequences. To this day, I feel they have unintended consequences, yet we cannot stand by and allow our country to stand for something that's wrong. I used to be one of, see feminism as, get out there and stop baking cookies, for God's sakes. But now I think if the woman wants to bake cookies, that's okay too. If she doesn't want to work, that's okay too. She's a human being. She should be allowed to do that if her family finds the way.
You both have made some excellent points, and it's all right. Let's take some questions from our viewers. Nina Ryan has asked, could the gender gap be the result of something other than deliberate discrimination, such as life choices that women make? I'll go ahead and go with you, Cathy.
No,
first.
I think the data is very clear that is what it tends to be, that women do tend to choose to work fewer hours, to work more flexible hours. That's what you see in professions like law, among pharmacists, that women are choosing flexibility over promotion and pay. Women tend to take some years out of the workforce. A lot of them tend to lean back in preparation for taking years out of the workforce. That's the whole point of Sheryl Sandberg's, lean in, was that don't do that. Don't take a back seat. Don't let your career take a back seat unless that's what you want. But again, if that is what you want, it's going to result in a discrepancy in pay. So I think we need to have a conversation about why women are making those choices. If women truly do want to be the primary responsibility, to have the primary responsibility for child rearing and for taking care of the home, that's wonderful, and they absolutely should be able to do that. And I would never want to, shame them or get in their way. I do wonder, however, how much societal pressure to make those choices plays into those choices. I think that this right here, like, this is the conversation we need to have. Okay, women are paid less not because of outright discrimination, but because of a more nuanced gendered expectation. Is that a good thing? Is that a thing that really fits into the new economy? Is that a thing that we want to continue going forward? Or should we be making choices about who stays home, who takes primary responsibility for the home front based on things besides gender, like education or aptitude or interest, as opposed to, all right, the woman does this, the man does this.
And Kamala?
Well, I would have to disagree, because in my research, and Bloomberg put out a study that said in 99.6% of all occupation categories, women make less than men in those same occupations. Now, I agree that there are choices involved, but I don't agree that there is no discriminatory wage gap. We see it over and over again. Walmart, let's look at minimum wage workers, right? So these are workers that, even working full-time, cannot survive in this society making $17,000 a year. 64% of minimum wage workers are women. That's not because they want to work at these places. It's because that's where they get the jobs. Now, the other question about women choosing jobs that pay less than men's. So we can take, for instance, child care attendants are paid less than the guys that drive your car in the parking lots. Is that because we care more about our cars than our children? No, it's because historically that area has been handled by women and they're paid less. And historically the cars and the valets have been men, so they're paid more. Same with custodial services versus the hotel maid. For instance, in Los Angeles recently, we finally got this law passed in California, that if you're a custodian and you mop the floor downstairs, you should not be paid twice as much as the woman that mops the floor upstairs.
Bridget Miller has a question. She says, is the ERA a panacea for achieving women's equality? If not, then what else needs to be done? Kamala?
Well, there is no panacea. As Cathy says, and I agree with her, we have to change our culture. There is no one single thing. There are multiple things, right? We need to talk about these questions to one another and assert that, yes, gendered parenting generally hurts women. We have to have conversations about this. What the ERA will do will be a starting point from which we can have these conversations and a baseline. All we're saying is we would like basic human and civil rights guaranteed to us by our government. From then, we are perfectly capable of taking it on. I feel the lawyers that I've met that are women, that are so brilliant, that are in this struggle, we will succeed, but right now, there's nothing for them to hang on to. So no, it will not be a panacea. It will be a very arduous and perhaps litigious period. But without it, I guarantee you that things will not improve, that culture will not of its own accord correct itself. We need enforcement, because people are greedy, and unfortunately, if they can get away with paying a woman 30% less, they will do it. It's just unfortunate, but that's really why we need it, is as a kind of, hey, don't go any farther than here, pal. This is where it ends.
And Cathy?
Well, no, I don't think it'll be a panacea. I don't think, I want to go back to your point that now is the time, and I would say now is not the time, not at all, because again, I think that we have gotten so far. As your documentary brings up, there are a lot of issues that we still have to deal with, and I want to see those issues dealt with. But again, I think they mostly have to do with choices. And We cannot legislate women's choices. It's not possible, and I wouldn't want to do it if we could. So that's where the work is. I think that's where we need to be focusing. And I further think that it's not the time, because right now, I've been kicked out of feminism for saying this, but men are having a very hard time. Men, average age, median wages for men since the 80s have decreased, and for women have increased. So I don't think now is the time.
Okay, and now it's time for Answer This, where the reviewer gets to ask a question directly to the author. Cathy, go ahead.
Kamala, what besides, this is something I've been racking my brain about, because I encounter a lot of feminists who want to solve these issues with legislation, and I obviously don't prefer that. I think it's a blunt instrument. I don't like to be coercive. But then when people say, okay, well, what's the solution? I don't have a good answer for them. And so I'm wondering, besides legislation and besides the broad issue of education, what specifically would you want to see implemented or started to help ameliorate some of the sexism that we see in our society still today?
Well, one thing I thought is, how come we have Women's History Month and we teach no women's history? How come we don't provide teachers with some role models for young women to see, and to see how we have been a part of this country? I feel like it's kind of rude to say it's Women's History Month and then nothing. I mean, I was severely undereducated in terms of women's history, so I didn't really know how I fit in. So that's one thing we can do. I do think that another thing is to talk to each other and tell each other when things like that happen. When you're experiencing sexism, or rape or domestic violence, we're so terrified of speaking out because nothing happens, and a lot of times we get fired or we, lose our promotion or whatever. I would say we have to become more brave. And it's scary, because it's scary to be a woman. All kinds of bad things can happen to you. But you know what? We've got to stand up, and we've got to do what you do. And I applaud you for being willing to step out into an arena that is incredibly dangerous and, make your voice heard. That's things we can do.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Again, the film is Equal Means Equal, produced by Kamala Lopez, which will see limited release in theaters at the end of August and will be available everywhere September 6th online. Thanks to Ms. Lopez for joining us to discuss the film, and to Cathy Reisenwitz of Sex and the State for her critique. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for watching Bookmarks. I'm Susanna Woodhead. We'll see you next time.